Here's a short presentation from me. I am exploring the notion of maturity in spirituality. I'm from the, this is what I do. So let's listen what I have to say about this. When we're children, we're able to listen to one and the same story over and over again. Children can be captivated by a single plot and never get tired of it. I remember a story I made my grandfather tell me over and over again. It wasn't a nice fairy tale. It was in fact a story of, or a legend of a vampire who kept killing people in a certain village whenever they came to a mill and would stay there overnight. The villagers were so frightened of the vampire that they completely abandoned the mill and took their grain to a far village to be grinded. One day, an unconventional stranger came into the village and, having heard the story about the vampire, decided to stay in a mill over the night. The villagers warned him, but to no avail. He entered the mill, he put a mannequin into the bed and hid himself at the attic. The vampire came and struggled all night long, wanting to strangle the mannequin. He cursed while doing so and gave up some crucial information about his identity. By wonder, the stranger survived the night intact. The vampire disappeared at the sunrise. Now, this was the terrifying part of the story, at which I felt pleasantly horrified. But I remembered that as a child, I was even more interested in the second part of the story. The people, seeing the stranger coming out of the mill unharmed, felt hope after a long time. The stranger was alive and knew the vampire's name. That meant that his grave could be found and a way of killing him implemented. That would mean that the end of everything that was terrible. The solution was at hand only if people would unite in searching for the grave of the vampire. Everyone, from the young to the old, needed to participate in that. Eventually, the vampire's grave was found, and villagers pierced his heart. But alas, a butterfly escaped through the corpse's mouth and started causing death to children by choking them. The story had a bad ending. What seemed a solution was no solution at all. The vampire was released to kill even more people, but in a different form. I think by now you must be asking yourself, what kind of grandfather tells such stories to his little grandson? Additional question may be, what kind of child is excited to listen to a horrible story that contains the moments of terror, relief, and more terror over and over again? In fact, the end of the story makes the child a possible victim of the vampire, who is now choking children in the form of a butterfly. The answer to this is at hand. My grandfather was a man from the Balkans who grew up listening to such stories at the beginning of the previous century. To put this in a historical perspective, cognitive emotional theories of raising children were still being formed by the men like Freud and Jung. My grandfather, when I grew up a little, would tell me their stories over and over again because I found them fascinating. I found them as terrifying and as inspiring as the story of the vampire we have just heard. Both Freud and Jung were strangers that dared to go into the mill of the human soul and face the vampire. Having come out in the morning, they had different variations of the story to relate. Sorry, lost my track. Where are you? Yeah. Facing the vampire or facing the shadow, becoming aware of its name meant gaining certain control and hope of a possible solution to the mystery of human existence, human suffering, and uncertainty. The story of Freud and Jung contained the promise of solution, but there too a butterfly escaped and made their theories interesting, however, not the ultimate solution to what would make this world a danger-free zone. They did what was humanly possible, but the human nature in reality did not change ever since. The story of the vampire of Freud and Jung are so interesting because they speak of human darkness and fear in a way that seems to point towards the solution. It takes the listener through their own fears and gives them hope. That is an important element of such stories. However, the terrifying end makes the story an ongoing one. The less than perfect ending does offer more horror, but at this point, a redeemed horror, as we have seen that the evil can be, even temporarily, defeated. The conspiracy theorists, the ones that we find in social media, for example, theories contain a similar plot. The world is a horrible place. There is an invisible and nameless vampire who is holding people terrified hostages. The conspiracy theorists in this current age have become the heroes of the social media who have the courage and audacity to name the vampire by his name and create communities who are being captivated by their stories. It must be that we are hardwired to this plot. In other words, it must be a part of our instinctual, archetypal script that helps us that helps our imagination process reality. The very fact that we are instinctually wired to such stories makes them not only terrifying but also soothing. It is the instinctual nature of the conspiracy theories that is dangerous when people captivated by them stop searching for truth, but rather they are in search for the instinctual satisfaction. The problem of conspiracy theories is not only a problem of personal spirituality, constellating a compact complex that makes introspection impossible, but it can create a cultural complex that captivates general perception, hindering the ability of communal reflection and discernment, leading to fundamentalism. This can have profound political implications, especially when conspiracy theories become generally acceptable. In this case, they may develop in a messianic dictatorship, promising to deal away with terror by piercing the vampire's heart and creating the true horror, which is not contained in a mill, but released in reality into the world. Let us remember that most of the humanity's conflicts have started off as conspiracy theories and offered their final solution. Nazism, communism, the genocide in Rwanda and so forth had their origins in conspiracy theories. The conspiracy theories that we find in social media may sometimes sound outlandish. However, with certain listeners, they stop being such. The reptilian conspiracy of David Icke, which claims that the world elites, including the British royal family, are in fact reptilian aliens, was initially laughed at. However, it has become a standard narrative repeated by many other conspiracy theorists throughout media. The danger of such theory is that in case it reaches its critical mass, it finds its justification to violence. Conspiracy theories are unavoidable as they are the template that help us dealing with the uncertainty. The problem is not with the stories, but what we do with them. In social media have become tremendously fertile place for their flourishing, so much so that they can become an independent cultural artifacts being picked up by the mainline media and culture. We see an example of that, for example, in the movie Prometheus, that builds up its plot based on a famous social media myth of Anunnaki, the alien creators of the human race. So at this point, I will stop. It's just, I think, an interesting way of kind of assessing the media and its message and what it does to us. But what is most important is what we do with it that makes us spiritually mature and politically mature as well.